Hello and welcome to another episode of the Contract Warrior podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about why verbal direction from a COR can quietly destroy your position. My name is Christopher Williams. I am a former contracting officer. I've executed pre-award, post-award for A&E, construction, and even service contracts, also REAs and claims, so cradle to grave contracting. And today we're going to dive into that verbal direction that comes from a COR and how it can quietly destroy your position. And this, might have some friction for those who work for the government and those who are, contractors who say, hey, I disagree. But here's the reality that we're going to go through, and that is trying to keep a strong position as a contractor. That is our goal, right? How do you maximize your effort in demonstrating causality and the related compensation to the contracting officer? That is the key, right? With that known, you're going to take extra measures as a contractor to ensure you don't quietly destroy anything in your position, that you are efficient and ready to note the file and to even take the issue beyond an REA, right? But hopefully your administration is so locked in that the activity or the contracting officer can read the information and say, this is a no-brainer. We need to go ahead and get this resolved. But to do that, we need to first identify how you can inadvertently destroy your position just by receiving direction from a COR. What does that look like, right? Now, to begin, some of the most dangerous decisions in federal construction happens during conversations, right? Just casual conversations. Discussions in the field or a quick phone call or even a site walk, right? It's notorious for picking up things that are ambiguous or assumed or what have you. And until things are in writing, it doesn't lock it in. You have to actually take that conversation and put it in a formal email or an RFI preferably. So a verbal request to just move forward isn't going to pay the bills, right? You're going to have to fight hard to reestablish that actual constructive change if that's the case. So you want to make life easier on yourself with a follow-up correspondence, right? So you just make your communication even better. So all too often, contractors think they're doing the right thing, right? They're helping the project, or they're avoiding delays, cooperating with the government, just keeping the project going, maintaining schedule momentum, right? Those kind of things. But what often happens is months later, the issue basically evolves into a dispute. And then guess what? The contractor points to a conversation or a verbal or some type of discussion in the field that took place and tries to anchor to that authority to identify causality for the dispute, right? And the government normally responds with, the COR did not have authority to change the contract. Nice guys finish last in construction. If you're a nice contractor, you're not going to be in business very long. You have to be accurate. And just to do it because you have pressure from the government is not the right answer. And I know this, and I can say it boldly because I've worked on the inside and I've seen it from my standpoint as a previous contracting officer. And there is no hurry. There really is no hurry. Even when things are on fire and things are going crazy, figuratively, there's no hurry, okay? Things need to get locked in. The red tape is infinite. So sometimes the agency tries to find ways to streamline the process, and when they do that, they think that the contract can be kind of set aside for a second and then go ahead and sort of give a verbal or do whatever. You need to make sure your best interest is on the forefront, right? Because again, the government can say that the COR did not have authority to change the contract, and then you're left on your own. And now you have to file a claim, right, to be heard. So you don't want to get to that point. So a simple follow-up email or RFI. So let's go into this even further, right? So the misunderstanding that contractors often have. Well, many of them believe that the government told us to proceed, usually with contractors who aren't the best when it comes to administrative oversight. Well, so-and-so said so, or that's what we thought when we had that conversation. And it's miraculous because we're talking about lots of money and lots of time. and a federal contract on top of it all. But, you know, at the end, federal contracting authority is far more structured than many project teams realize. And to the contractor's credit, they can, they can receive mixed signals, right? Because there is a humongous acquisition team on the government side or construction execution team, however you want to label it, where there you have your CORs, right? Your contracting officer representative who is coordinating things and doing stuff like that. You have your technical reps, you have your inspectors, you have your engineers, you have your field personnel. But they provide possibly operational coordination or technical discussions, right? But they don't have authority, contract authority. And if they do, if the COR does, if any of those do, it would be the COR, and it would be very limited, very, very limited. Regardless, you still want confirmation from the contracting officer because they're not able to modify the contract or authorize additional compensation or approve scope expansion, right? Or scope creep or grant schedule relief. So none of those particular positions can do that. But in the field, it may seem like they can because of the position they have and the way they're leading through the meeting and they're trying to represent the government at the meeting. And when I was a contracting officer, my CORs, right, or the construction managers, when I was working with NAVFAC, those construction managers were out in the field, and I didn't have to be out there because they're out there, So it's not they're related to the KO, but they're not directed, or they're not a pass through, if you will. They just have very limited authority, and we're talking. The contractor needs to have a strong position. So you want to have it in place. You don't want limited authority to be your position. So anyway, these distinctions are critical, right? They don't do what the contracting officer can do. So here's the KO mindset, right? The government evaluates authority very differently. So one of the first things the KO evaluates during disputed execution is actually who had authority. Not who said something, who implied something, or who the contractor believed was directing the work. No. But whether contractual authority actually exists. Now, am I saying that you wouldn't be able to recoup entitlement? No. I'm saying it'd be very difficult to do so, and you have to go the whole 9 yards to demonstrate government error. So why not just take it a little bit further and get it documented so that you have a slam dunk case when the KO gets wind of any assumptions you had based on a constructive change where somebody said something in the field and you took it as a change order. Now, this becomes especially important, okay, when additional work is performed. I've had that happen. Someone said something, the contractor did it. Now we have to find a way to get this resolved. And that's when accountability comes to the surface. So along with additional work, you have expanded scope, resequencing, or labor increased, right? The government may separate operational coordination, those roles that were mentioned, from contractual direction. So if you bring a concern to me as a contracting officer and I'm looking at your issue, I'm looking at operational coordination, but I'm looking at contractual direction. So you should be using that same filter. Okay, the COR said this is good to go. Now let me make sure that contracting, my contract specialist on the project is also good with that. Just to make sure the whole team is on the same page, right? Nothing against the COR, but let's just make sure that we're good to go. So that means in the conversation you can say, "Hey, thanks, Bob, whatever. He's a construction manager for the government. Hey, I appreciate the conversation. If you don't mind, I'm going to send a follow-up email or with an RFI attached that summarizes our conversation. And if you can just answer that and say, yeah, we're good to go, then we can move forward as an organization. But I need that confirmation before we proceed and before I communicate with my subcontractors." There you go. That's very, very professional. Now, when you go back to the office, you can sit down, you can go over your RFI, you can structure it accordingly, and you can send that in. And then the government team knows that you're very serious about any possible constructive changes and that your administration is locked in, right? That you don't take any risk. You have it in writing. That is music to my ears, if I'm a contracting officer and I see that type of administration. And then obviously, if you were to proceed without clarifying, yeah, that's where you get on shaky ground, right? I'm not saying impossible recovery, just a difficult recovery. When the contractor hears stuff like, "Oh yeah, go ahead and proceed," or "We'll work on that later," or "This needs to happen now." That's the best one right there. Like, "This needs to happen right now." Let's see what else. Oh yeah, we agree this is necessary, right? So we have a discussion. We talk about the environment of the situation, and we both agree that we need to do this and that, and then we're done with the conversation, right? What? What just happened, right? Because what's left over is the contractor still performing the contract. So, I know it goes both ways where the government might think that they just had a conversation and the contractor now has a green light. No, no, no. Always follow up with an RFI if it's a cardinal issue and get it locked in. Absolutely get it locked in. If you don't have that with your REA, it makes it very difficult. And if you don't have that during a partnering, I'm talking an RFI that's on the record, then you're missing an opportunity to have a third party in the meeting, right? Which is your RFI. And you're also missing the opportunity to hold the government accountable to give you an accurate reading on your assumptions or your concern. It's priceless, absolutely priceless. But when you don't pause to formally confirm whether the direction is a changed scope or whether compensation was preserved or whatever, the schedule impact was acknowledged, then obviously you're on shaky ground, right? And then sometimes the contractor is being influenced by maybe technical individuals that are trying to coordinate something. And it seems like, well, we just had a meeting on site about whatever it is. We're all looking at the electrical panel, coming up with a solution. So we're going to assume that we're good to go, right? That we can go ahead and move forward. The COR agreed when we were there. They were like, yeah, that's a good path forward. Let's proceed. Just a partnering meeting, right? It's not a negotiation, right? Because none of those individuals who are there can obligate the government. If you have a contract specialist there, if they're trying to obligate the government, they'll disclose that this is pending contracting officer approval. But other than that, no. You have to be warranted in order to actually grow scope, right? To actually say, hey, that sounds good, contractor. So when I was a KO, if I went on site and we went over something and I said, hey, that's great, let's go ahead and proceed. That sounds like a great plan. I will actually execute a notice to proceed when I get back to the office within about 2-3 hours so that tomorrow morning you can proceed with the path forward. I can get funding from the customer and we can lock that in. Now, if you don't receive the notice to proceed, just know that we're working on it. And once I have the funding, I will issue that to you. See, that's very different than a COR saying, oh yeah, that sounds good. Let's proceed. Go ahead, proceed. Two different. Those are night and day accountability statements, right? And plus, whatever I send in writing would also be thorough. It will tell you that this is an obligation, right? And funding is pending. So it's night and day. So you absolutely want that follow-up. So if nobody's given you that, then obviously they don't have the authority. So you just note it administratively that we had this meeting and this is what was mentioned, and submit an RFI, right? To distinguish that cause or distinguish that concern that flushed out during that meeting. Perfect. Because as a KO, I actually want to know as well if anybody is trying to authorize or obligate the government. Well, with that said, thank you for your time. I hope this was some added value. If you want more information on what exactly your contracting officer wishes you would know, head over to thinklikeyourko.com and get that free training. And you can read what the KO wants, contractors to understand. This was written by me for you. So it's something that I think is very helpful for any contractor of any size, shape, or mission. All right, with that said, thanks for your time, and we will see you on the next episode.